They were elite groups who would not mingle with, who would not associate with, who wouldn't intermarry with other groups. And they were divided up into quite a few categories. But most basically, most fundamentally, it was the division between B'nai Torah, Talmid Chachamim, scholars, rabbis, and Amcha, ordinary people. And the Baal Shem Tov shattered this. He absolutely splintered it. He just broke it to pieces. I think quite successfully. Because the Baal Shem Tov shifted the emphasis from scholarship to sincerity. And he argued that sincerity has nothing to do with education, has nothing to do with intelligence, has nothing to do with background, it has to do with you. Simple people can be much more sincere than scholars can be, perhaps. The phrase that the Baal Shem Tov employed to represent his position is a Maimon Chazal someplace, it's a statement from the Rabbi somewhere, that says, and I quote, Rachamana liba boy, Gott liebt a heart. That's the Yiddish translation. God loves the heart. In other words, the Baal Shem Tov emphasized the passion, the sincerity, the involvement in Yiddishkeit, as opposed to the sophistication and the excellence of one's performance, as the priority, as the center of Avodas Hashem. This was the Baal Shem Tov's position. And he would say that it's possible for a simple Jew on the simplest level to be closer to God than the great rabbi who's very sophisticated and profound. I just read my children a story this past month of Shabbos about the Baal Shem Tov himself. The Baal Shem Tov told the story himself. He said it was my 18th birthday, I think, or 16th birthday. At this point, the Baal Shem Tov was already a great tzaddik and a great gaon and a great makubal, a great Kabbalist. And as is the custom of the Kabbalists, he said, I isolated myself. It says in Kabbalah, you're supposed to do his boidedus. You're supposed to be alone, you're supposed to be solitary, and you're supposed to spend some time thinking about yourself and your life and where you're holding and so forth. And I was very deeply entranced in meditation, and I was miyached yichudim, I was trying to create all kinds of mystical formulae to create good energies, good lights, good life. And I was so engrossed as a Baal Shem Tov that I didn't see what was going on around me. And suddenly I saw the holy Baal Shem Tov, the Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet. And Eliyahu Hanavi was smiling. So the Baal Shem Tov says, I had seen Eliyahu Hanavi multiple times when I was with other tzaddikim. Never seen him alone. And to me this was a very meaningful experience. But I found it curious why the Baal Shem Tov is, Eliyahu Hanavi is smiling. So the Baal Shem Tov, Eliyahu Hanavi told me, said the Baal Shem Tov. He says, you're sitting out here in the field and you're struggling with your meditations. You're just trying to concentrate and trying to create connections. And the host and hostess of the hotel you're staying at, and it says their names, simple people, who all day long would walk around and say, Geleibt Hashem Yisbarach, blessed be God, Geheiligt soll sein heilige Namen, hallowed or hallowed should be His holy name, and so on and so forth. He says, they have no idea what meditation is, they have no concept of Yechudim, and their praise of God is shattering through the heavens and going to places that your meditations can't even dream of reaching. So the Baal Shem Tov had this inspiration. He came back and he introduced to the tzaddikim, the start of movement, this idea of celebrating simple people. And he says at first it was not so widely accepted, but over the course of years, this became the position. And the root of it is this idea of Rachamana Liba Boy. What matters is how sincere we are. The Gemara says, the Chazal tell us, it doesn't matter how much or how little we give. What matters is that it's sincere, that it's genuine. There was a chassid whose name was Reb Shmuel Betzalel Sheptel. He's known in the Chabad world as Rashbatz. He passed away in 1905, for those who need a frame of reference. That's a few years ago. He was an incredible chassid. Or the Tzemach Tzedek, or the Reb Marash, or the Reb Rashab. he had the incredible schus to be the private tutors of two Lubavitcher Rebbes. He was the private tutor of the Rebbe Rashab when he was a young man, and when the Rebbe Rashab's son, the Friedrich Rebbe, was a young man, the previous Rebbe was a young man, he hired him to tutor his son. He was a very, very big chassid. He was obviously a big Gaon and a big chassid, but he was a very, very great person. Rashbatz was famous for his very, very creative allegory. He had an incredible ability to describe things. Because in addition to being a great scholar and a great chassid, he was very, very, very aware of the world. And these incredible ways of articulating, depicting things in very vivid ways. And there are people who used to quote, the Proverbs of Rashbat. It was almost like a category, like Shlomo HaMelech made Mishalim, so the Mishlei, the Proverbs of the Rashbat. And one of his proverbs is that there was a king who was given a gift, a parrot, a beautiful, beautiful bird with many colors, and beautiful, gorgeous bird with these incredible colors. Every time you see these birds, you're trying to see if it's paint. Incredible colors. And birds usually have pretty long lives, but for long is not forever. Eventually the bird began to age, and the first symptom of aging was that the colors became lackluster. They weren't as crisp, they weren't as robust, they weren't as sharp, they weren't as fluorescent. And then you started to see other symptoms of age. Hair started to peel, the feathers started to fall off the bird, and you started to see rips in the feathers. The bird couldn't fly, and then eventually one eye didn't open, and then one leg broke, and then one wing broke, and the poor bird was a shadow of its former self. And the king had this weakness for this bird. Every day for years he would take this bird out of its cage, take it off its perch, put it on his finger and play with it. But here, Yom, the day finally came that God took his bird back. The bird died. And the king was pained. So it was a sculptor who worked in the court who took clay and he made an identical bird out of clay, but exactly as it had been in its youth when this bird was in its full luster, and the colors were incredible. And he presented it to the king for the shloshim. On the anniversary of the death of the bird, he gave the king a gift. The king took the clay bird, he looked at it, he turned it around. It was a replica of the bird that he had loved so much. He put it on the mantle. But it was quite clear that the king was not appeased. He appreciated the gift, it was a meaningful gift. And the sculptor said, Your Majesty, the bird that you lost was missing an eye, and had a broken wing, and a broken leg, and the colors were faded. I give you such a beautiful, crisp bird. Why do you not react more enthusiastically? And the king says, Weil lebt nicht. He does not live. He's not alive. The holy Baal Shem Tov traveled to Germany, and he came into a large shul. Germany has not like us, Stieblach, big synagogues, big shuls. In Frankfurt, a gigantic shul with hundreds of mispalim. Beautiful, beautiful edifice. He enters, and he comments to the people nearest the door, I cannot stay here. I cannot be in this room. So they asked him, why not? And he said, because this room is full of words, full of words. All the prayer, all the Torah that's been recited in this room for years is filling the cavity of the room, and I just can't be in the room. So the German Jews were very flattered and complimented by the Baal Shem Tov's observation, that the Baal Shem Tov is recognizing that their shul is full of words. So the Baal Shem Tov says, you misunderstand. The Zohar says that when a person prays, our prayers are supposed to fly upwards. But in order for the prayers to fly upwards, they need lift. They need wings. You pray and you study, but there's no lift, there's no wing. So all of your prayer and all the words of Torah study you've done over the course of decades is stuck in the building. It doesn't rise up. What are the wings on which a prayer achieves lift? What is the force that raises our Yiddishkeit to the heights of heaven? And the answer is life, warmth, chayes, passion. The Tanya, which we are journeying through, is now turning to this issue of passion. And we're going to be on the issue of passion for a considerable amount of time with help of God. And of course the point is, as the Chazal say, and the Alter Rebbe quotes it, mitzvah b'lei kavon kaguf b'lei neshama. A mitzvah done without passion, a mitzvah done without intent is like a body without a soul. A mitzvah, a person performs a godly ritual, an act of service to Hashem, but he's dispassionate, he's cold, he's uninspired, he's unenthusiastic. It's like a body without a soul. Now, a body without a soul exists. It's dead, but it is. A soul without a body does not exist. Soul without a body doesn't exist in the physical world. It exists only in the spiritual world. So there is something to be said about mitzvahs. There's something to be said about the importance of doing mitzvahs, the actual ritual. In fact, we are coming from 3 lessons, which are really chapters 36, 35, and 37, in that order. That's how I taught it to you. Where the entire focus of the last several classes, minus last week, was about action centricity. The most important thing is the deed. You got to do the mitzvah. For various reasons. You have to do the mitzvahs because that brings God to the lowest level. It elevates the base world, the physical world as well. And it's the purpose for which God created His world. The Eibishter created His world, in quotes, to make for Himself a home in the lowest realm. This home is achieved through deed, through action, through mitzvahs ma'asiyos. So the bottom line is you have to do the mitzvahs. Because the mitzvahs are godly acts. But, says the Alter Rebbe, doing a mitzvah dispassionately, doing a mitzvah without life, is like a body without a soul, like a bird without wings. It has no life, has no energy, and it goes nowhere. Says the Alter Rebbe, that's a bad idea, that's no good. We need to incorporate, we need to inspire, we need to infuse our Yiddishkeit with passion. And to be sure, it's one of the key chidushim of Hasidus. How important his lahavos and his spoilus and his rakshus and his oirus. That means to say, the need for a person to be moved, aroused emotionally in their relationship with the Eibishter is a central part of Hasidus. We're supposed to be excited about Yiddishkeit. We're supposed to be excited about our relationship with the Eibishter. We're not supposed to be cool and collected and sophisticated and therefore more reserved about the way we do Yiddishkeit. The Yiddishkeit needs to demonstrate joy, fire, passion. It's the soul of our Torah and mitzvahs. It's the soul of the Yiddishkeit which we're performing. We believe, and this is a point made repeatedly in Tanya, that mitzvahs are godly acts. In other words, if I might tell you my rhetoric straight, without beating around the bush, the word symbolism is heretical. Now, that's a bit of an oversimplification. When we say mitzvahs symbolize ... there's something key wrong with that on a core level. Mitzvahs don't symbolize anything. Mitzvahs symbolize themselves. We don't light a candle because it reminds us of something. We don't make kiddush because it reminds us of something. We don't put on film or shake a lulav or eat like a mishnah because it helps us remember something or helps inspire us. We believe very primarily, in a primary way, that mitzvahs are godly acts. Not symbols of godly experiences, but godly acts. And there is godliness in the deed. There is godliness in the action itself. Like the Tanya said earlier in chapter 4, that it's possible to hold God. Though the Zohar says it's impossible to hold God, there's one exception to the rule. There's one way you can actually hold God. Not godliness, God. How? Do a mitzvah. You put on film, you shake a lulav, you made a bracha on a candle out of Shabbos, you prepared like a mishnah, you separate challah. That is not simply symbolic of something. That is an act by which you touch God. So mitzvahs, the behavior of mitzvahs, are very, very important. And we must do the mitzvahs. We must do the mitzvahs because we're elevating the lowest world, we're making the world a home for God, and in mitzvahs there's God. Having said that, notwithstanding that it's true that the behavior of mitzvahs are of incredible importance, Chazal say, mitzvah b'lei kavan, guf b'lei neshama. It's not enough to do the deed, you need to have the passion. And this, Rabbi say, is the issue we are going to embark upon tonight. And with the help of God, we're going to be continuing this conversation over the course of the next series of classes. It's going to take us a while. The only pledge I will make to you is that I'm not rushing. That's my only pledge. We'll take our time. It's quite involved, and it's quite subtle. And we're going to be dealing with what's called levels of love and levels of fear, and different types of love and different types of fear. We're going to try our best to explore all these things to the best of our ability, with the help of God, of course. But we're going to be pursuing the realm of passion. The passion in Judaism is not the mitzvah. The passion of Judaism is the soul of the mitzvah. Or said alternatively, the passion of the mitzvah are the wings of the mitzvah. And the passion is of incredible importance, because the passion raises the mitzvah up. It makes us alive. I would add, quite logically and quite obviously, that the passion of the mitzvah is also a great motivator. People who do mitzvahs dispassionately find it harder and harder to continue doing these mitzvahs, right? What does the pasuk say? Vatihi yerasa moisi mitzvahs anoshim ulumada. That means to say, man's fear of me has become mitzvahs anoshim ulumada. It's completely mechanical. It's habit. It's rote. People go through motions. They do what you're supposed to do, but they have no chayas. They have no vitality. And if we practice mitzvahs, and there's no joy, and there's no passion, it is virtually impossible to sustain. The previous Rebbe writes, it's brought in the Hayom Yom, the Rebbe's Hayom Yom, that people spiritually fall slowly. The first thing that happens in people's spiritual decline is that they become dispassionate. They lose their energy. And after you lose your energy, you find that simple things, which used to be so easy for you, have suddenly become a burden. They become a schlep. They become difficult. So passion is important for a variety of reasons. It's a great motivator. It gives life to our Yiddishkeit. And one more thing. What is that? Passion of Yiddishkeit is a mitzvah in itself. It isn't only we're being passionate to raise up our mitzvahs, it's one of the commandments. The Eibishter says, I want that you should practice mitzvahs in a passionate way, in an inspired way, in a meaningful way, in a driven way. Now, what is the Hebrew word for passion? You're modern, you speak Hebrew. What's the Hebrew word for passion?
Chukah.
Really? Oh, come on. You can't do better than that. Chukah means passion? That's how the word is used? Choim. Passion is chukah. With a ches. What's the word for passion? Chukah? That's the word that's used in modern Hebrew?
How do you spell it?
Which word? Ches, vav, mem.
From the word That's like That's what I think.
That's right. What's the Hebrew word for passion? Choim. Passion. It's a hard word to define. So, Hislahavus. Fine. Hislahavus means fire. Hislahavus has the same root as the word choim. Fire. In the Tanya, the word that's used for passion is ahava v'yira, love and fear. You just got to get used to it. Okay? You don't have the word hitlahavut in Tanya. In general, in Hasidus Chabad, hislavus is not used quite often. We use the word hitpa'alut as opposed to hislahavut. What's the difference? That's a different discussion. But in the Tanya, when the Alter Rebbe wishes to discuss the passion of Judaism, he calls it ahava v'yira, love and fear. Because passion involves two things. Passion involves the desire to be connected, and passion involves the care not to lose that connection. And that is essentially what ahava v'yira are. So over the course of the next few weeks, the Hebrew version of passion is going to be Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. Ahava v'yira. So there are two things. A, passion brings meaning. It brings life. It brings purpose. It brings motivation to our Yiddishkeit. And B, the passion itself is a divine commandment. The Eibishter wants us that we should be passionate in our service of Him, in our relationship with the Eibishter. It's an interesting thing. The Rebbe once mentioned regarding Shabbos candles, which the women light, that the word for a candle is neir. Neid is 250. What is 250? It's the 248 mitzvahs plus love and fear. That's 250. With Ramach mitzvahs, 248 positive commandments, and their wings are Ava v'Yirah. What's ironic about it is love and fear are mitzvahs unto themselves. But in addition to the idea that love and fear are mitzvahs unto themselves, there is the idea that love and fear, that passion is the wings of all of Judaism. And of course the Rebbe makes the point that that's what Shabbos candles is. Shabbos candles is not a mitzvah. Shabbos candle is the warmth, it's the light of all of Judaism. So this is the discussion we're going to be having. We're going to be talking about passion. The word that we're going to employ is Ahavat Hashem and Yirat Hashem, love and fear. And the benefits of passion are obvious, right? Why a person should be passionate in the Avodas Hashem is quite obvious. What we will discover as we journey through this conversation is that there's different types of passion. There's simpler passion, there's more sophisticated passion. And the interesting thing is that in a way, whatever you do, you're sacrificing something else. There's an advantage to something which is more simple. There's an advantage to something which is far more sophisticated. And we're going to be exploring a variety of different types of passion, which are a reflection of a variety of different levels of human being. And each person is expected to deliver not just Yiddishkeit, but to deliver the joy of Judaism, to deliver the passion of Judaism based on their possibility, based on their level, based on their capability, and so forth, and so on. I think there's another way to put this, but now I'm getting a little hippie-ish, a little liberal. I think there's another way to articulate this point. And that is that every act of Judaism needs to be whole. When the pasuk says, "Kol atzmai temana," all my limbs speak. Every person knows in this world that only the mouth speaks. Your hands don't speak. I mean, in the case of Jews, you never know yet. But your feet doesn't speak. And certainly your, your appendix doesn't talk. I mean, your stomach may sometimes have a conversation under certain unusual circumstances. But there are limbs in the body that don't speak. The pasuk says, "Kol atzmai temana," all my limbs speak. And of course, that doesn't mean literally that your shoulder is having a conversation. It means that the words that you're saying are not only lip service. They're full. All of you is in those words. And in Yiddishkeit, there really needs to be, in each mitzvah, all of ourselves, which means a lot of things. When we do a mitzvah, it should be beautiful, which has to do with the senses. And when we do a mitzvah, it should be precise, and it should be with an understanding, and it should be with passion. Because we want the mitzvahs to be whole, just as we are complex, sophisticated beings with all kinds of dynamics and dimensions and aspects. We want each aspect of Yiddishkeit to be complete, to be comprehensive. And a part of that, a real part of that, are the passions that we invest in Yiddishkeit. And the Alter Rebbe begins the discussion as follows. Listen. The simple truth of the matter is that it's either or. Either or means as follows. If you want to look at this world as an ungodly place, which it is, in terms of human experience, in terms of exposure, God is completely concealed. Everybody knows you don't see God. I've told you the story many times where there was this professor on the radio who spent 2 hours arguing that there's scientific basis for the idea of a God. So some young yuppie calls him up on the radio and says, "I will believe in God. All he needs to do is reveal himself." Now, I remember at that moment, I was already a married man, how incredibly the lights went on in my head. This person was calling up to make fun of that professor and to say, sure, God exists. What's he hiding about? But at the same time, it made it so clear to me. All the Eibishter has to do to take away all doubts is reveal himself. He doesn't want to reveal himself because if he reveals himself, it would be at the expense of our own identity. God is hidden. And in as much as God is being hidden, just as you can't find God in a rock, you cannot find God in a heart and a mind either. In other words, if we're going to look at this world through the prism that this is Olam Lashon Helam, that in this world you don't see God in the physical things in this world, you don't see God in the ideas in this world. There's no God in mathematics, there's no God in chemistry, there's no God in physics, no God in biology. And there is as much no God in ideas and in feelings and in experiences that have to do with the senses and the emotions as there is no God in a rock. Flip it over. If, on the other hand, you want to look at this world through the prism of Torah and mitzvahs, through Yiddishkeit, there is as much God in the act of tefillin as there is in the dancing Simchas Torah. The ritual, the cold deed of doing a mitzvah, whichever it may be, tzedakah, mezuzah, has as much God in it as the most passionate act. Why? Because the godliness of a mezuzah is not limited to our experience. The godliness of a mezuzah is the belief that we have that God says, "Oisi atem loichem," when you do a mitzvah, you're holding me. So we believe that in the mitzvah you have Hashem Himself. No, you can study God, you can be excited about God, inspired by God. There's no more God than that, than there is in the ritual. So the Alter Rebbe sort of establishes as his baseline, if you want to look at the world as a godless world, there is no God in your mind and your heart either. If you want to look at this world as a God which is saturated with, as this world is a world that's saturated with God, because of Torah mitzvahs, there's as much God in the deed as there is in the passion. Nevertheless, says the Rebbe, everything I just said is true. The world by itself reveals God not at all. The world through the prism of Torah mitzvahs reveals God in the deed as much as in the passion. They're still different. And they're still different because in this case, you're feeling God. And in this case, you're not feeling God. In other words, when I do a mitzvah, I'm doing God's will. When I am passionate about God, I am doing God's will. So in as much as I'm doing what Hashem said, this is godly and this is godly. This is godly in an infinite way. This is godly in an infinite way. So they're equal. But at the same time, feeling that what I'm doing is meaningful. Experiencing that the act that I'm performing has a connection to the Eibishter, even though it changes nothing, it changes an awful lot. It's just the way it is. When you experience something, when you feel something, when you live something, it has an incredible increase in meaning. So the Alter Rebbe says, we'll all agree all mitzvahs are godly, whether they're ritually based or words or even ideas and feelings. At the same time, there is something to be said about the idea that when we should perform mitzvahs, we should experience passion in our performance of mitzvahs. And he's going to spend the next 3 chapters, which for us is not going to be 3 classes. I'm not sure, but it may be as many as 5 or 6. I'm still determining how slowly I want to journey through this. But one of the things we're going to be discovering in the next few chapters is that there's different types of passion. I'll let the cat out of the bag, as it were. We're going to be discussing 4 levels. When you read the Tanya on the surface, the Alter Rebbe discusses only 2. But if you read between the lines and you pay closer attention, he discusses 4 levels. The lowest level of passion is what he calls tmimus, sincerity. The second level of passion is what he's going to be calling avativis. That means raw emotion. The third level of passion is what we call avasichlis, which I'm going to call right now sophisticated emotion, deeper emotion. And the highest level of passion is going to describe is the level of merkava. Merkava, chariot, being one with God, experiencing Ein Sof. And these are different personalities, these are different Jews with different possibilities. Each one has to be the best themselves. The Jew whose level is Tamam B'maisa, who's capable only of sincerity, that's what he needs to do. And in his sincerity, it's the wings, it's the spirit of his Torah mitzvahs. The person who's capable of raw emotion must bring this forward and make that the spirit, the wind, the wings, and the lift of his Torah mitzvahs. The person who's capable of more sophisticated passions must do the same in his world, and so on and so forth. So we're going to be discussing these different types of passion. For tonight, let's do this. The Alter Rebbe says the world is divided up into 4 categories. Daimim, Tzemei, Chai, and Medaber. Daimim means the level of inanimate objects, minerals. Chai, Tzemei means the plant kingdom. In modern biology, plants are considered animals of a different family. In Torah, there's different words used to describe plants. They use the word koyach. They don't want to use the word chayes. The third level is the animal kingdom. And the fourth, of course, is the human kingdom. And these are 4 different realities. Daimim, Domem, Dalet Vav Mem Mem. Tzeimeach is Tzadik Vav Mem Ches. Chai is Ches Yud.
That's animals, that's
Chai means animals, yes. And Medaber means people who can communicate. Mem Dal Beis Reish. And the Alter Rebbe says these are 4 worlds. These are 4 worlds. Technically, he says, these 4 worlds are Doimim, the level of the mineral is the level of doing an act of mitzvahs. Tzeimeach, the level of the plant is dibur, is speaking. Many mitzvahs are done with speech. Chai is the level of a person expressing raw passion, animal-like passion. And medaber means a person who's expressing sophisticated passion. Passion has to do with the mind, more human-like passion. So he says, we're going to develop, in Yiddishkeit, there's doimim tzmeach chai medaber. There's the deed and the speech, which is the mineral level and the plant level. Then there's different types of passion. Animal passion and human passion. Animal passion is raw and forceful and singular. Human passion is subtle and complex and with nuance. And we're going to be developing these ideas over the next few classes. But the Alter Rebbe says it's not enough to have doimim and tzmeach. Though it's true that the key is the ma'isa mitzvah, the deed of the mitzvah, as the Baal Shem Tov said half an hour ago, Rachamana liba boy, that Eibishter liebt our hearts, the Eibishter wants our passion, the Eibishter wants our excitement, our joy, and our enthusiasm in doing Torah and mitzvahs. And with the help of God, we're going to develop this over the next few classes. This is what I wanted to share with you. I want to finish with a story, and perhaps I'll tell you more than one story. The previous Rebbe relates. Let me give you an aside. In the Hasidic tradition, Chabad, almost from the outset, was out of the mainstream. From the times of the Alter Rebbe, Chabad was out of the mainstream. The beginning of that was the machlekes. There was a falling out of sorts. There was a difference of opinion. There was some political divisions. But there's no question that a part of that is the fact that Lubavitch, Chabad, has different type of Hasidus. As time has passed, and of course Chabad was isolated. We lived in Russia, while most of Hasidus lived in Galicia. And the difference between living in Russia and living in Galicia is how much you suffered and how poor you were. So Chabad became more exclusive. It became more different, more its own. And from the beginning of the Hasidic movement, Chabad has been accused of being passion deficient, of being a Hasidus that doesn't have enough fire. It's a complaint, it's a libel that's been levied against us from the very, very beginning. You know, Hasidus Chabad is a very sophisticated Hasidus. It's an intellectual Hasidus. Or to use an expression which will make some very happy and some very frustrated, it's a Litvish Hasidus. Chabad is Lita. Lubavitch is Lita. And it's a Hasidus without a doubt that has an incredible intellectual bend. There's no question about it. The previous Rebbe said explicitly, the Alter Rebbe had to create a Hasidus for a Litvish, a B'nai Torah. And from the beginning we were accused of having passion problems. And they used to say, other Hasidus may be like burning paper or burning twigs. But Chabad is like someone who has a brand new cannon, but it's properly greased. And he has cannonballs. And he has gunpowder. And everything is ready to go and he can make an incredible explosion, but he doesn't have a spark. He doesn't have the Polish a fink. In Russian Yiddish it's a funk. In Polish Yiddish it's a fink. They're missing that little spark, the little fire. And therefore, everything is perfect, except the whole point of Chassidus, which is passion, is not materializing. And it's a complaint that has been levied against us since the beginning. There are various different ways. Chabad doesn't need to defend itself. Anything real doesn't need to defend itself. It stands on its merits. Everything has its strengths, everything has its weakness. Chabad has its own approach. There are various different ways that this question, this charge, is responded to. And one of them is that Chabad Hasidus believes it's worthwhile postponing the passion so that when the passion finally comes, it will be deeper. In other words, it's easy to burn a piece of paper. It's entirely different to burn coal and to create fire that's not just very bright and very with large flames, with a lot of heat, a lot of concentration. And in Chassidus Chabad, the whole idea of intellectualizing Chassidus was about adding passion, adding power, adding integrity, adding depth to the fire. Having said that, Afapike, nevertheless, our Rabbeim were always moved, sincerely, when they saw real Hasidim who were not Chabad. And to be honest, we should be moved. When you see a real Hasidic Yid and he's not a Lubavitcher and you cannot see Hasidus, then there's something wrong with your Hasidus. Because, yes, there's different Drachim in Hasidus, but to see real Hasidus, especially in today's day and age, I mean, there's a lot of, we can afford streimels better than ever. You have clean-shaven people wearing streimels. In Crown Heights, you have clean-shaven people, unfortunately, wearing kapotas. We can afford it. Our grandparents couldn't afford it. But Hasidus is a different kind of price. You can't pay for it in dollars. You got to pay for it in neshama. You don't see real Hasidic Yidden, genuinely free people who are not inhibited by society and what this one's going to say and that one's going to say, who love life and love God and love Torah and love Jews. When you meet such a person, it doesn't matter what color is Bekeshe. It's beautiful. It's mamish. It's so exciting. It's such a wonderful experience. And over the course of the history of Hasidus, there are stories that, so to speak, bring forward this point very acutely. And here is one. I'll probably share with you more than one story, but here is one. The previous Rebbe says, my father spent more than half of the year of 1901, 1902 in Vienna, Austria, Samach Beis. He went after Tishrei and he stayed till Pesach, and I think he even stayed past Pesach. He was there, I think, for 7 months. He was there for various reasons. Part of it was an act of galus. He wanted to be alone. He wanted to get away from being a Rebbe. He didn't wear streimel. He just wore a hat. And people did not know who he was. And he was able to mingle. He was able to mingle with people. And the previous Rebbe said, my father met a variety of different Hasidim from different groups, not Chabad by any stretch. See, Vienna, Austria was Western Europe. But by the turn of the century, there were Hasidus that already invaded. There was Hasidus in Berlin even before the war. There was Hasidus. Hatzeke Yidden, passionate Jews, Neshama Yidden. So he tells a story. He says, my father would go from different shtiblach, and he would meet different people, and make different conversations. And he wanted to know what was going on. He wanted to feel Jews of different types. And sometimes they would honor him. They would realize that he's a big Talmid Chacham. They would give him an aliyah. One of the funniest stories that happened during this period was that a young man walks over to him and says, young man, he says, you need to feel the fire of Judaism. If you want to read the fire of Judaism, you have to read this book. And he shows him a Likutei from the Alter Rebbe. He's teaching the Rebbe Rashab about Likutei. The Rebbe hat sich gemacht, nicht wissendig. He made believe he didn't know what the book was. But they met a community of Tolner Hasidim. There was a Beis Medrash of Tolner Hasidim. That's what they were called, Tolner Hasidim. And the Rebbe hung around, and they got to meet the people, and he was very, very excited and moved and inspired by their warmth and by their passion. One day he saw the following event. They were, there was a big noise outside the Tolner Beis Medrash. And the Rebbe sees that there were a group of Eltere Hasidim with white beards, walking very excitedly, very passionately, very, very enthused about something, schlepping huge barrels, huge buckets of water. And they're walking towards the Beis Medrash, the shtivel, the Tolner shtivel. What the Rebbe could not understand was that in the courtyard, the Beis Medrash, there was a well. And they're schlepping water from who knows where. And they're coming into the courtyard and they're filling a water barrel. Or into the Beis Medrash, filling a water barrel. And the Rebbe watches the excitement. And the Eltere Hasidim are carrying these buckets and these barrels, and they're running through the streets and talking excitedly, and all around them are the younger Hasidim, and they keep on offering to help. If you don't feel good, if you're tired, I'll be happy to take it instead of you. And the elders said, no, we're going to carry it ourselves. And it was a scene, it was a sight to behold. When they finished, the Rebbe asked them, what's going on? So he said, the Tolna Rebbe is coming to town. Their Rebbe is coming. And they prepared, they made the place spick and span. They painted and they redid the walls and everything was done perfectly and beautifully. He said, what are you schlepping water for? He says, in this city, in Vienna, there's one wealthy Talmud Chassid who offered to pay all of the expenses of the entire weekend. The Rebbe is going to come, he's going to have to feed everybody. So expensive and so on. He'll pay on one condition, that they'll take water from his well. So even though there was a well in the courtyard of the Beis Medrash, this Chassid had offered to pay for all the expenses. They were schlepping water from his well to the Beis Medrash. So the Rebbe says to them, but why were the old Yidden with the white beard schlepping the water? Why weren't the younger light schlepping the water? And they answered him something to the effect, I think the name is the Baditchev, that when a Yid davos at the Eibishter, he creates malachim. But you want to have gesundte malachim, you want to have healthy malachim. You don't want to have diseased malachim, sick malachim, compromised. You want to have healthy angels. He says, Mela, us, those of us who have lived longer and experienced more, we wanted to carry the water ourselves. We wouldn't let the younger light carry this. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, my father was so moved by this, by the genuineness of it, and the joy of it, and the passion of it. The Rebbe felt that there was something wrong. The Rebbe felt that the elder Hasidim should have had Mesiras Nefesh to let the younger Hasidim schlep the water, not because they're old and weak, but because part of Hasidus is chinuch. That means that the older Hasidim are supposed to read the younger Hasidim. But he was incredibly moved by the warmth, the joy, by the passion that these people displayed. And this is very, very much a part of Hasidus, and this is the topic of tonight. Another event that happened during that visit to Vienna, also very interesting, it was a Thursday night. And they walked into a shtibel. And it happened to be Pashas Mishpatim. A Yid was sitting, and he was saying Chumash v'Taich. He was reading Chumash with a Yiddish translation. But he was reading it with so much enthusiasm, so much joy, so much life. My father, the Rebbe says, because my father was very moved, and he went over to him, and he began to have a conversation with this person. And it was Pashas Mishpatim. Pashas Mishpatim is business law. And he realized that this fellow who was reading Chumash with this passion was a scholar. He wasn't a simple person. In other words, some people are passionate about reading Chumash because that's all they can do. He was a Talmud Chacham. He knew how to read Gemara with Poskim, and yet he was reading Chumash with Yiddishkeit with incredible amount of passion. And the Rebbe made a comment to him about, what are you so excited about? And he told the Rebbe, this is your problem. The whole Yiddishkeit is supported by this passion. It's, if I'm not mistaken, this was the Jew who told him about the Likutei. When we do acts of Judaism, even the simplest acts, even the plainest acts, there's passion in it. The passion that we invest in acts of Judaism raise us up, they raise Yiddishkeit up, and it's the motivation, it's the life of our condition as Jewish people. I had a teacher who told me many years ago that when he was in yeshiva, they had a yeshiva in Israel. And there was a period of time that yeshiva in Rishon LeZion. I was never in Israel, so I don't know where Rishon LeZion is, but I'm sure it's a wonderful location. And there were a group of boys, let's say 10 bachrim or 12 bachrim, all very bright, very intelligent, very studious, very diligent, but teenagers, hyperactive, full of energy. And they had no teacher. There was a period of time that they were sitting by themselves and learning. And they would learn all day long, didn't waste any time. Every night, after they finished learning, they would sit in Fabreng. They would sit around, they would say L'chaim, they would sing a niggin, they would tell stories. And invariably they would dance. Kids, young bachrim, what could be worse than that? In this shtibel where they were sitting, there was an alter chassid. I think it was an alter chartkiva chassid. I think is what he said. I forgot. Old chassid. No. An old sadiger chassid. An old sadiger chassid. This man never talked to them. He was exchanged a word. He sat in his corner and learned. And they come under it. They were kids. They were sharp. They sat and learned. But they acted like teenagers. You know how teenagers get. If you don't know how teenagers get, you either have a bad memory or you have selective memory. But okay, he never made a comment. He never said a word to them when they learned. He never made a comment when they acted wild. He just ignored them. Whenever they danced, he stopped whatever he was doing and danced with them. They finished dancing and went back to his corner. He never exchanged a word. A Hasidic Shir. This is passion. This is passion. And passion is an incredibly basic part of the lifestyle, the tendency, the direction that is Hasidus. We know that there's a concept called Amalek. Amalek. Or Amalek. Amalek is a nation. Amalek is a grandson of Esav HaRasha. And in fact, his name appears in this week's Pasha V'Yishlach. Amalek, amongst all the other troublemakers, was born. Amalek are a bad nation. They're bad people. The Torah says you're never allowed to forget Amalek and you have to erase them. In Chassidus, they talk about Amalek not only in terms of a nation that attacked the Jewish people and tried to kill them, but we talk about Amalek as an idea, as a concept, as a philosophical concept. And the idea that is Amalek is called Asher Korcha. Asher Korcha means two things. Asher Korcha means he cools you off. The word Kerach. You're excited, you're inspired. What are you so excited about? A person does a Inyaf and Yiddishkeit, and he does it with joy, he does it with passion. Another person says it's good that you're doing Inyaf of Yiddishkeit. What are you getting so excited about? Or a person sees the hand of God in his life. And one of the most beautiful places where we see the Eibishter's hand is when you see Hashgacha Pratis. Where do you see God? We don't meet him walking in the street. You open up the Kodesh, you see a Sefer Torah. You don't see the Neisenat Torah. Where do we see God in our regular life? We see God in little things. You meet a person you weren't supposed to meet, and it turns out to be an incredibly rewarding experience. You get lost. You end up on the wrong street. And you meet an old friend. I mean, this happens all the time. Hashgacha Pratis is in front of our nose. Wherever you look, you see Hashgacha. And a sensitive person celebrates it. Every time you see Hashgacha Pratis, you say, oh, God. Now, some of us jump up and down and make somersaults. Some of us snap our fingers and say, wow, Eibishter. And some of us have a different kind of reaction. And then there's those people who say, don't get so excited. The Eibishter's like, God is great. So God showed himself to you. Don't be so impressed. And it's wrong. It's true God is great, but it's also true that we're supposed to be impressed. And Amalek's whole MO, Amalek's whole thing is, don't get so excited. And sometimes it gets sophisticated. It says, Amalek come along with a big beard and say, listen, you and I, we're rabbis, we're scholars. Scholars don't get silly. Scholars don't get frivolous. Scholars are too busy, too sophisticated, doing meaningful things, deeper things, to permit themselves the effervescence, the overflow, the joy of simple folk. And it's wrong. In Yiddishkeit, there needs to be enthusiasm, there needs to be excitement, there needs to be joy. The second translation of Asher Korcha, which is quite similar to the first, it's from the word mikre. Asher Korcha means he tells you it's a coincidence. Everything that happens, coincidence. You're getting excited about the Eibishter, coincidence. Don't get so, it just worked, it happened. It's an accident. Don't get so excited. And by Hasidim, and in Hasidus, this is very, very, very important. This was always very important. It's important now too. This is the way it works. This is the way it works. The Orches Tzadikim says, Orches Tzadikim was written about 1,000 years ago. And to this day, we don't know who the author is. There's a rumor that it's Rashi. One of those great Tzadikim, the Hasidi Ashkenaz, who wrote books incognito. To the extent that we don't even know the name of the author, let alone his biography. The Orches Tzadikim says everybody knows fire and water cannot cohabit. Says he, similarly, passions for God and passions for materialism and worldliness cannot cohabit. It's one or the other. In other words, if we are going to allow ourselves and bring ourselves to a place where we don't just do Judaism, but we live Judaism, and we're passionate about Judaism, we have to become less passionate about other things. We have to become less important. Because you cannot have dual passions. You can have dual passions. Pizza and ice cream, those are dual passions. But you can't have dual passions, Hasidus and the Yankees. It just doesn't work. It's great. That's a difficult one. We have to find a head there for that one. Yeah, because they're in different worlds. And the Orches Tzadikim says if a person wants to be passionate about the Eibishter has to be important. And if the Eibishter is important, things other than the Eibishter must become less important. And this is This is the test. This is the challenge that we have. In other words, we're all good people, right? This is America. Everybody's good. Everybody's wonderful. We're all good people. Our heart's in the right place. But fortunately, we can afford to be involved in many different things. The message of passion is that in order to be properly or comprehensively passionate about the Eibishter, it has to become the most important thing in our life. And it has to become the most important thing in our life. Not like, okay, I'll give this up and that up and other thing so that I can be passionate about Judaism. Erase it. Forget it. Go home. Go back to the pizza and ice cream. It has to be, I want this. Ich will das. I want Yiddishkeit. And I want the meaning that Yiddishkeit gives. I want the connection Yiddishkeit gives. And I'm using this word again. I want the freedom that Yiddishkeit gives. It's the freedom of not defining myself by others. It's the freedom by not caring what other people think. And it's the freedom to express joy. It's the freedom to express happiness. It's the freedom to express connection to something bigger and higher. I want that. I want Yiddishkeit. And when a person wants Yiddishkeit, the passion that is generated from that desire is a natural passion. In other words, I'm not making myself want to love God. I'm in love with the Eibishter. This is the definition of my life. And to be very honest, that is the definition of a Hasidic Yid. What is the meaning of a Chassid? A person to whom Yiddishkeit matters above all else, and he's passionate about it. When you meet a person, you meet a Hasidic Yid, you see life. I've told you the story before. On occasion. I went to speak in a shul. The Rebbe always asks that when it comes Yom Tov, we should go to different communities and speak in shuls. And of course, you come to a shul and you repeat the Rebbe's teachings. The reason the Rebbe wants us to go speak in shuls is primarily to create bridges between communities. That people shouldn't be so isolated and separated. But in addition, you bring the Rebbe's avot. You say the Rebbe's Torah. So I went to a shtibel. It was in Borough Park, on a side street. It was a private house. It was the first floor. You walked up steps. It was you know how it is. Upstairs lived the Ruv, the Rebbe. Downstairs was the Beis Medrash. Usually in these kinds of shtiblach, in the basement is the mikveh and what they call the room for Shalashidas. And I came in with a group of people. My father gather was with me, and I did the talking, which is kind of strange. And there was an old Hasidic Yid who was that of. If I remember correctly, he wasn't even wearing a shleimer. With a big beard and payas. And the moment you looked at him, he said, "This is a holy man." Mamish. He just looked so sharp. I don't mean sharp, he looked good. His eyes showed focus that you see by holy people. And incredibly humble. I don't even think I was married. I was 23 or 22 years old, and this old rabbi, who I found out later was an incredible Talmid Chacham, sat down to listen to what I had to say, like as if who knows what. But this is the story, and it's a story repeated so many times, like just a mind-blowing story. We finished davening. When the Lubavitch comes into another shul, so there's different types of people. Some people are so happy to see us. Some people will say, "Okay, welcome," and some people wish we would go away. For various reasons. Some don't like us, and some simply feel like we make them uncomfortable. And it's true. Lubavitch makes people uncomfortable. So Maida finishes, and we started to dance. The handful of Lubavitch is, I don't know, we have 6 or 7 people. And the rabbi is dancing with us. The rest of the shul cleared out as quickly as they could. A couple of guys stood in the back and watched, but made sure that we shouldn't be able to reach out with our tentacles and draw them into the dance. And 2 Lubavitcher boys were standing in the back of the room watching. And the rabbi who's dancing with us turns to them and says, "Join us." And they were not comfortable, you know. But it's always, you're always in the mood of dancing, you know. It's not so... You have to be in a certain mental space. So they hesitated and they didn't want to come. I'll never forget his reaction. This rabbi stopped and he looked at them. And with pain, he said, "Ihr seid doch Lubavitchers. You're Lubavitchers. Lubavitchers are falling asleep also? Ihr seid doch Lubavitcher." In other words, this trademark of a Hasidic Yid is a certain kind of chayas, a certain kind of a life, a certain kind of enthusiasm. What's going on? You know? Mela, other people are fashlafen, but our trademark is joy. And that's the message. The message is Yiddishkeit needs to have life. We will be discussing over the next few weeks that the life has different expressions and different levels and different dimensions. It's very involved. But this is the key. And I would say to you again that the foundation of having passion in Yiddishkeit is desiring it. When you feel that Yiddishkeit is your prison, we've got a problem. When you feel that Yiddishkeit is your life, like Dr. Rabbi says in Tanya later on, chapters 46 and 47, that in Judaism we go out of Egypt, in Judaism we're free people. You can do Judaism with enthusiasm, and then you grow. And you know what else? You're contagious. You're contagious. But don't worry, it's a good disease to spread. Okay.